you've got a fan club. Nancy, so many of us remember that iconic picture of the day in which you were inaugurated, made the Speaker of the House, and you did something that no speaker had ever done before. You called children, and in this case, I think some of your own children and grandchildren, to the podium, and the photograph went out all over the world, and the people who are joining us all over the world saw that photograph. And many people said, leadership, power just changed. Something shifted. Did you think of that consciously? Was that a conscious decision you made that day?
Well, it was rather spontaneous, as a matter of fact. I had been told that maybe it wasn't. I said, may I bring my grandchildren with me to accept the gavel? And they said, we're not sure that the rules allow that. And I said, well, who's in charge of the rules? And they said, the speaker. So I said, well, okay. And I approve of that. But when I brought my grandchildren up, I could see in the eyes of the other children, because on the day of swearing in, members bring their children under 12 years of age to the floor, and they were sort of looking that way, so I invited them up. Children just came running up, children and grandchildren of members from both sides of the aisle, I'm happy to say. And so it was this big collection of children there, and I was able to gavel the House for the first time as Speaker on behalf of all of America's children and all of the world's children.
And that was the message that went out, that the welfare of children and the concerns of families was going to be a priority of yours and the priority of your leadership. And many times women, when we have moved into positions of leadership and power, have been counseled to distance ourselves somewhat from the mother image, the grandmother image, to be sure that we'll be seen as tough enough and we'll have all the right strategies in place. So how do you balance that?
Well, for me, I always say to people, just be yourself, and the self that I am is a mom and a grandmother, and I consider my life in politics as an extension of my role of mother. When I went in to Congress, my children, four were in college, one was going into college. I asked her if it was okay for me to run for Congress, and she said, "Mother, get a life." And she's here today, Alexandra, with my son Paul, who are here. But I always thought we always want the best for our children. That means not necessarily the material best, but the most love and affection and care and concern about the world in which they will live. And it isn't good enough to have the best for our children unless other children have opportunity and have the comfort of home and love and the rest. So I don't think we do our children any favor by raising them in a place where everything's okay for them, but that 1 in 5 children in our country lives in poverty or goes to sleep hungry at night. That's why I'm so pleased that we just passed a bill and the President is going to sign it on Monday for child nutrition in America. I was very proud of that. It's not though about legislation, it's about problem solving. And we think that we are moving to solve that problem in our country, and of course our concern is international, global in that respect.
President Ellen Johnson Sirleaf said today in an interview that keeping this balance between being tough enough, in her case being called the Iron Lady of Africa,
Love her.
and bringing, as she described it, the grandmotherly my Ellen, as she is called by the families in her country, that's a balance she has to fight every day, that she struggles with that every day. Can you talk about that balance in your own life between being the tough leader that can wrangle all those differences of opinion and yet the nurturing, supportive mother and grandmother?
Well, some people don't think I do that balance well enough, that I am more strong, shall we say, than maybe they would like. But I'm there to get a job done, and I think that's what women do. We're not there about power necessarily unless it is for a purpose. And we're there to do a job, and we get it done the way we get it done. And that is effectively with our values-based, our concern for children and the rest. But it is a challenge, women in politics, because even women, as happy as they are about seeing a woman be successful, really have a discomfort sometimes when you have to be as strong as you need to be to get the job done.
And I think you...
But that doesn't bother me at all. It's about the children.
But you have suffered a bit of those kinds of, slings and arrows, as it were. Of course, everyone in public life gets used to them. But, people saying, well, she's really tough. Boy, she plays politics like the men. Boy, she really knows. And seriously, she knows how to get things done. But it does sometimes take being tough and just taking that criticism and saying, this is how we're going to lead.
Well, it helps to have friends like Pat Mitchell who encourage women all the time to do their best at what they do. She really has been such a force. And
Speaker, this is your interview.
What do you think about women in power?
She really is good. Well, I know, that you balance this extremely well, as do all the many of the people who are here. But I think one of the things that our audiences around the world are interested in, both the women and the men who've gathered for this conference, is really looking at the ways that ideas and leadership and innovative solutions that are coming from women and girls and the men who support them, how that's changing the direction of the future. How would you describe that?
Well, first of all, let me say this. I'm so honored to be here with all of you. So many stories, so many wonderful sources of strength and inspiration to all of us. And it's always a wonderful thing to draw that power and strength and inspiration from women who are doing things so much more difficult than passing a health care bill in the Congress of the United States. Because the challenges they face are so different. But let me say that I think that we have a responsibility to each other. The story I like to tell is one that really impacted me, because when you come and you're doing this for the children and doing it the best you can, you have to recognize the responsibility to the future that we have, but also acknowledge those who fought so hard to get us to this place. The best way I can explain that, and Pat has heard me tell this story, is that when I first became a leader and I went from my first meeting to the White House as a leader of the Democrats, I didn't think that much of it. I had been to the White House many times. I wasn't even apprehensive about it, and I'd been to many meetings there. But when I went there and the door closed behind me, and we were seated at this small table with President Bush and the Vice President and the Republican and Democratic leaders from the House and the Senate, I realized that this was unlike any meeting that I'd ever been to at the White House. In fact, it was unlike any meeting any woman had ever been to at the White House, because you were there not as an appointee of the president, however magnificent that honor would be, but your power was not derived from someone else at the table, but it was derived from the people who had sent you there. And it's a very difficult table to be at. So when I was sitting there and President Bush, ever gracious, was welcoming me for my first meeting and this or that, all of a sudden on my chair, it became very crowded. It was really crowded. It was just getting like this at the chair, and I must have looked like I had some unease as the meeting was beginning, but it was crowded on my chair. And I realized that on the chair with me was Susan B. Anthony, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Sojourner Truth, Alice Paul, did I say Lucretia Mott, all of the women who would work so hard to get women the right to vote, all the women who had worked so hard to empower women, all the women whose shoulders we were standing on to get to be there. And they were all there on the chair, and this had never happened before or since. And I could hear them say, "At last we have a seat at the table." And then they were gone. And then they were gone. So again, I mention that because when you ask about getting the job done and the rest, you're just not out there alone. Others have worked hard, taken risks that were very difficult at a time when a woman couldn't even leave the house alone, much less to be preaching for women's rights. And 150 years ago, and now here I was with that seat at the table. And of course, you understand your responsibility to women who will come after or at the same time to help them know their power, realize their power, use it in a way that is a very special contribution, because I believe that the contribution of women is one that is so special, so individual because of the experiences that they have, whether it's professionally or personally, at home, whatever. And women's intuition, women's values, women's effectiveness in terms of the use of time, consensus building, and the rest really makes a big difference. So again, I want women to take responsibility for politics and government. We need you very much, and we need many young women to come into politics.
I can't think of a better message for us to bring to a close an extraordinary day of stories, except that I was thinking as you were speaking, Madam Speaker, that all those women who were sharing your chair, you have now become one of those women who shares the chairs not only of all of us who are in this room, but our children and grandchildren in the next generation. So what will you be saying to them? What will be the voice what will be the message you will give to tomorrow's women and men?
Well, the challenges that we face are so great. Men have been in charge for a very long time. I think there's room for some other ideas and some other forces of power to come into play. And I know my former colleague, Marjorie Margolis-Mizminski, is here, and she made a big difference in Congress when she was there. I want women to know, I keep saying know your power. I wrote a book called Know Your Power. Nora Ephron said, next time you write a book, let me help you with the title. That's a terrible title. I said, well, the first title I wanted was taken, What I Don't Like About My Neck. That was already taken. So in any event, I want women to know their power. I want them to know there's a tremendous need for more women to assume positions of power. I want young women to know that it's important for other young women to see women in their generation with their experience, whether it's a working mom, in having a seat at the table, whatever that seat of power happens to be. Because the need is tremendous, the contribution that you can make is so individual, and it is something where you just are yourself, because that is the most unique, authentic contribution that you can make, with your values, with your experience, with your determination. And in our country, we can certainly do better with improving the number of women in power. I know some of our visitors have more women in their legislatures, and of course, President Johnson Sirleaf, isn't she magnificent? So I visited her in Liberia right before I became speaker, and she put on this big welcome for us, dancers, singers, everybody from the business community and the arts and this or that. And I thought, how can I ever repay this hospitality? And so I said, Madam President, when I speak, I would like to invite you to speak at a joint session of Congress. I thought that was spectacular. And she said, oh, that's great. I said, when you're in Washington, let me know when you're coming and we'll prepare for that. And she said, I'll be there in 2 weeks. Well, I wasn't the speaker yet, so I said, perfect. So I went home and I said to the then speaker and the leaders and this or that, guess who's coming to speak to the conference? And we had the biggest turnout of members, and people were so proud, and we had to have all kinds of other events to accommodate everyone who wanted to see her. And she made a speech about having 1 foot into the, well, you know how magnificent, 1 foot into the bush with her grandmother who couldn't read, and she at the World Bank. It was so spectacular. No one ever heard such a thing, and it was so I was so proud to have this woman president there, but I didn't know when I extended the invitation that it would be in 2 weeks. But in any event, it was something quite spectacular for all Americans and for the world to see this woman acclaimed in a joint session of Congress. So again, we help each other, and I think that women helping women is very important, and if only in the inspiration that we receive from each other, but hopefully for the networking that's so important in what you're doing here. So Pat, thank you for the invitation. Pat, really,
Madam
she is
Speaker.
quite a spectacular person.
Madam Speaker.
I'm a big fan of Pat. And
Madam Speaker.
when she says,
I do want
come
to make
an event, I'm there.
I could let this go on all night. No, I do want to make 2 observations, and I know that it's shared by many people here, that along with all of the many legislative accomplishments that you're making on behalf of this country, I think the greatest legacy in many ways is that you and the way that you have just talked about power and leadership have given us all permission to know our power and to seize the leadership to make a difference in the world. And I want to say how grateful we are for that. That is a pretty big legacy.
Thank you. Thank you all. Is that good? Are we finished? Thank you. Thank you all very much.
You're wonderful.